to the Backroads Built podcast. I'm Ben, and it is officially 1 week until the big day, the big Christmas. The big Christmas, is that how you say it? Anyways, it's the big day. You want to make sure, hopefully, your Christmas shopping is done. If this podcast is your reminder, you might be running out of time. We got 1 week left. As somebody who used to work retail as well, you do not want to be a Christmas Eve shopper. Those, especially, I saw a lot of husbands come in that day trying to get whatever they could get. So don't be that person. Make sure you get it done before then. But today we want to actually focus on a bit of a different religion that's not focused around Christmas. And our two guests today recently worked together to put on this unique and really cool viewing experience down in Toronto at the Fentster Gallery. It was called I Will Relate to You, which is an ode to the Jewish communities of Northern Ontario. So we brought on the artist as well as the curator of the gallery. And again, it's a super cool story that Bill and I are super excited to share with you, the listener. But before we get to all of that, first, I want to remind you, if you find yourself loving this podcast, please consider liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing, all of that good stuff. Whatever platform you interact with this podcast on, you can look at our YouTube channel. It's at NorthBayEcho. The same thing with our socials. You can find us at NorthBayEcho. It's so important for us to continue to grow. And just consider giving us a little like, share, follow to help us continue to grow. And one of the other things that helps us grow is our great sponsors, including today's lead sponsor of this episode, Source for Sports, North Bay.
Sports aren't just what we do, they're who we are. Source for Sports North Bay is your advocate, your local support system, and your biggest fan. 1321 Fisher Street has grown from a place where knowledgeable experts can help you find exactly the gear you need, to the hotbed of team uniforms, apparel and fanwear, to a community stronghold for all the things that truly matter to you and your family's sports journey. We love helping you find your first pair of skates, as much as we relish supporting local leagues, teams, and athletes. Wherever your sports journey takes you, make sure you visit Source for Sports North Bay at 1321 Fisher Street so we can help you along your way.
We are welcoming in a couple of guests. First, we have Meichan Waxer, who is a queer visual artist, curator, and arts worker. Meichan, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here today.
And on the other side, we also have the curator of the Fentster Art Gallery, Evelyn Tauben. Evelyn, welcome.
Hi, good morning.
Well, Ben, you did a really good job at that for sure, as always, introducing our guests. And this is an unusual story. I mean, we do pan Northern Ontario, pan the world, I guess. But it's not an immigration story, but we'll talk a little bit about this. But the beauty of this story is that we're going to take you to downtown Toronto to an art gallery, and then we're going to link it to the beginnings of this art installation exhibit. And I thought we'd turn to Evelyn because this is really important for context, I think, Evelyn, to describe what we're going to see at this storefront gallery. And we'll get into it, then we'll go back to Mike and then et cetera, et cetera. But just describe from you, because first of all, too, I mean, what it's like in movie production. What does the executive producer do, or what is the best boy or the gaffer? I mean, what is a curator? I know what a curator does, but in this case, maybe there's some special consideration to curate such an art installation as this.
Yeah, thank you. Lots of good questions. Well, first I'll just say that for those who haven't had a chance to visit yet, that Fentster is a window gallery. Fenster is the Yiddish word for window, and, similar to fenêtre. And we're located in a storefront window. It's a pretty nice size, like 5 feet deep, so it's really a little room onto the street that we've been animating for almost 9 years. And friends of mine operate out of the storefront that we're connected to and run an independent Jewish organization called Miechan. And what I do... many things, from fundraising to washing the window. But the exhibitions start with a conversation. And Meichan and I had a conversation, I think, about 2 years ago now. And so it just starts with an idea. And she was already working on researching her family's roots in Northern Ontario. As a Montrealer, it was new to me to know about these rural Jewish communities that had populated Northern Ontario at the turn of the century. Although I've since learned that many locals in Ontario also aren't familiar with the communities. So that was the starting point that I was very excited to tell a different story about Jewish life in Ontario and in Canada. And ultimately what we do is tell stories. You know, the art is a launching pad for talking about the Jewish experience, heritage, identity, culture, art, community, and connection points to other communities. And I like to spark conversation. And I like shows that are multi-layered. Because it's a public art space, it needs to grab the passerby. You know, it needs to be visually compelling. We're next to a Domino's pizza. Especially during the pandemic, people waited outside for their pizza to be ready. And, you know, there's something interesting to look at and unusual and unexpected. But for the more engaged viewer who wants to stop and dig in, I really like projects where there's a lot to peel back. And this is really one of them. There's so many visual layers. There's so much thought and detail that Miechan put into the show. And then it was natural for me to reach out to my colleagues at the Ontario Jewish Archives because they preserve and collect materials related to the Jewish history in the whole province, and to see if we could do this project together. And we have the main window that you see when you're sitting on College Street, and there's actually a side window. So we've put basically 2 exhibitions in this little space. And in the side window, we've reproduced photos from the archives, some of which happen to include Miechan's family, and a few family photos from Miechan. And we tell the story of Jewish life in Kirkland Lake and the surrounding area. So we managed to do a lot in a small space.
Well, it is a small space, and which, you know, when I got into the story, I thought, when I started looking at the exhibit, a lot of things caught my eye, and I like that analogy of the layers, particularly the floorboards, which we're going to talk about. And I looked at it from above and below. I mean, we all look at art and we have our own interpretations. And it's the other interesting thing we'll talk about more probably to the end about the feedback from that, whether it was the people waiting for their Domino's pizza or people that are well in tuned with art and go out of their way to seek out these destinations in a different way because it is a storefront. Like that was a complete surprise to me as well. So there's so many things in this art exhibit that are, I don't know, somewhat probably unique because when you think about at one time, people used to be employed to dress up the windows. You know, when people shopped on the street, you were captivated by the scenery that you'd see in it. I mean, this is an art installation. But Miechan, tell us about, we're going to get into the history, but let's just concentrate. What are you going to see in the exhibit when you're standing outside on College Street?
Okay. A whole lot of things, to put it lightly. So the exhibition, as Evelyn has said, there's lots of layers of items that point to different elements of the story. So about 20 years ago, I inherited journals that my bubby had made. They weren't like daily journals. It was more so the story of my family coming to Northern Ontario as told by her bubby and mom and aunt. And I held on to these for about 20 years, really wanting to do something with them. And this is my doing with them. But in animating that history, I also thought it was really important to speak to so many other people connected to this history and to weave through their stories, because it's not like they were isolated in the North. They were a part of a community. And I wanted to situate their story in community. So all that to say is the items that you see all point to bits and pieces of that story, my connections to the story, and the wider community I was able to talk with connections to the story. So things like the floorboards reference the story of the first family shop that was like a little provisional bakery to service the railroad workers. And it was just slapped together with floorboards, canvas walls, a dough box, and a stove. So there's things that point to that in the exhibition. And in the journals, my bubby writes that old clothes and newspaper were shoved under the floorboards to keep it warm for customers. And I just think of what a generous offering of making sure that those railroad workers had warm feet while they were buying their morning bread. And since so many of the folks that I spoke to, now these people were by and large in their like 80s or 90s even, their family had stores in the north, and they told me about the types of clothing and objects that were sold in the store. So I tried to capture those textiles through the clothes that I kind of like layered between the floorboards, kind of like caulking of tiles. And so, yeah, that helped create the tapestry that you can see from above and below within it. And some other really prominent objects that speak to this notion of community. You'll see the canvas at the back. There's a roll of canvas that points to those provisional walls that's like slightly unrolled. And in that unrolling, I embroidered in my community here butterflies that point to another point in the journals, which was about women coming together and hovering like beautiful butterflies to place their dishes on a communal table. So I sat in community with women and queers in my Jewish community to teach people how to embroider butterflies.
Yeah, no, when I started to drill down on that and I saw that one picture of sitting around the table doing the embroidery, that probably took you were trying to recapture what really happened a long time ago in a faraway land.
Yeah, well, also just thinking of like what it meant to come together and exchange. Like we weren't exchanging food, which is something that I often do, but we were exchanging story and skill, which is a thing that I think can be lost in community too. A lot of times, we'll gather and we won't really notice when we are having these like intentional moments of exchange. And many of the people that came were like, this was so cathartic to be able to like sit and just be occupied with our hands and let our minds wander and speak about things that were really pertinent to us. And often people talked a lot about their bubbies. It was a lot of bubby chat.
Evelyn, tell us about Fentster. How did that start? And I mean, you've kind of explained your connection, but tell us a little bit about that. And again, this unique gallery space.
Yeah, well, the window has actually been curated for about 7 or 8 years before I got there by a local artist, Rochelle Rubenstein. And she used the storefront as her studio. And when she decided to relocate her studio and Miechan moved in, I proposed that this unique space for contemporary art continue. And then we kind of consciously rebranded it as a space for, I talk about it as work connected to the Jewish experience. There's a lot of conversation in our world about what is Jewish art, but under this banner of connected to the Jewish experience, it's a wide umbrella, and it's allowed me to work with artists of a variety of backgrounds, including folks who aren't Jewish, as long as we're making a substantive connection. And in the time that I've been doing this, which is now almost 9 years, we've also done public programs, conversations, book launches, concerts, visited schools with visiting artists, partnered with, progressive mosques and festivals and on, and started having gatherings for artists. So Fentster has it started as this focused idea of a window gallery, and it has become a bigger arts organization and point of gathering.
Yeah, it's growing.
And to connect it back to the exhibition, when you asked about how do you curate, there are a lot of ideas that Miechan is developing connected to her family story. So there was an early conversation, like what will be the project for the window? And because it is a storefront, that once upon a time it was a store, that's when we really honed in on the fact that her great-great-grandmother had started a store, and that there's this kind of natural convergence between this space that we occupy and this story that we're trying to tell. So it became really an ode both to the store that her family started, but also to the fact that that was a big way that the Jews engaged in life in the North, let's say, and sustained themselves and built community was by establishing and running these various shops and stores.
And how do you get, just before we move on to, the title, I Will Relate to You, how do you get feedback? I mean, there is the website, but how, it is a storefront. So you don't, there's probably not a drop box where you put a piece of paper and say, I like this. So how do you gauge that? Because certainly for sponsorship and, it's all about writing grants and proposals and those sort of things. How do you do that?
Yeah, you're right on. I have a grant due today. It's been a question and a challenge over the years, like how do you measure impact? And, one time when I was inside the window in between shows and cleaning the window and like getting some sticky stuff off of it and thinking, this is kind of boring. While I do this, I'm going to count how many people walk by in the next hour. And in 15 minutes, I counted 100 people of all ages and of all backgrounds. And then I stopped counting. It is tricky for grants, to be honest, but I know that a wide variety of people engage with the work. We're next to a German church on the other side of Domino's. We're across the street from a school. And it's really been about democratizing the art experience. The art is for everyone. And there's a lot of intimidation, even for me who works in the arts, about going into art galleries that can be seen as rarefied places and only for like certain kinds of people. So that's always what's been exciting for me, is that it's there. You don't have to keep track of opening hours. You just can come by or stumble upon it and have an art experience in your day. And over the years, I've heard from people, it's true. There's not like a very direct feedback mechanism, but I do hear from people. Sometimes when we're installing a new show, neighbors walk by, especially during the pandemic, people would pass by and say, it's so great that you're still doing this. I appreciate this so much. And it was an interesting moment because we're probably one of the smallest art spaces in Canada. But we were one of the only ones that stayed open continuously during lockdown. So all of a sudden, it became like a superpower to be a window gallery.
A window gallery, yeah. No, again, and I liken it, it's a bad metaphor perhaps about people, again, storefronts, when people were decorating storefronts from a retail perspective, but still it made you stop and look. And especially during the, holiday seasons, downtown Toronto, the Eaton Centre, et cetera, that was back in its heyday. But Ben, I know you have some questions because we want to delve into the I Will Relate to You title and theme of the exhibit installation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting listening to you guys talk about this. And one of the things as you go through the website is, first of all, I love the tagline. Like as you said, Fentster is, I believe you said, is Yiddish for window, right? So I love how the tagline's a window into Jewish life through art. But what I find so fascinating is it kind of works for both the Jewish community, but also the non-Jewish community, and allowing them to, like for myself here in North Bay, we don't have a huge Jewish community. And it's something that, growing up, it's very Protestant, and Catholic is kind of like the major religion that you see people are tied to. And so it's so interesting going in and seeing these little pieces. And I guess, for you, Evelyn, what was the inspiration for you really to put this on display and to really kind of showcase that culture?
Well, I should say I started working in very big art museums. I worked at the Smithsonian. I worked at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And there's something very exciting, that just on your way to lunch, you pass Van Goghs. And also they're very limited places with a lot of rules. And everyone is in their kind of little niche. And I've always been interested in public art. So there's just something about the window that's very exciting to me. And over the years, I've kind of developed a focus. Sorry, let me go back. I lost the thread of my thought, but that I made a conscious choice to shift from working in these big art museums to working in Jewish arts and culture. That's where I felt I could make my unique offering and contribution. And really picking up on what you said, Ben, that for me, it was always about sharing Jewish expression with everyone. It's not about being insular and only talking to ourselves. And nothing really does that better than the window. And sometimes there's a Jewish self-consciousness that's really heightened in this moment, that Jewish culture can only be for ourselves. And as much as we celebrate multiculturalism in this city and this province and this country, Jewishness doesn't always get top billing when we really want to highlight what multicultural Canada looks like. And something about having such a public space is very exciting to me, to say Jewish is part of the fabric of this city, not, in some pockets where we stick to ourselves.
Yeah, we don't have to have these lines. We have to transcend them. We could talk about ours and yours and those kinds of things. But I want to go back, Miechan, to the theme and you've mentioned a couple of examples about how did you go about picking some of the, we're going to call them artifacts, like some of them are, to put into and the positioning them? Because again, my eye caught that railway spike because I've done a lot of railway kind of stories and things that I know about where the last spike of the CPR railway was put into the ground. But the first spike, I often say, where was the first spike? Well, I actually know about that, and that was on one of the Backroads Bill podcasts. But some of those things that are in because I had asked by email, the gloves, the spike, the bowl. And in fact, I know about one of those flower bowls because we had one of those cabinets where the flower came down and that kind of thing. So it actually struck a chord with me from my childhood as well. But anyway, talk about a few of those examples too of how you put this together. Because again, we record oral history, or we said, oh, we better record so-and-so before they pass on. But this is a different way, of course, of passing on history from your great-great-grandmother to a contemporary sense and putting it out there on a storefront. The whole thing is actually kind of magical when you think about it, but this is creativity at its finest. But anyway.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, as the exhibition, it's about my connection, what was told to me, what exists, and the space in between. So I really wanted the objects to be multifaceted, right? So if we think about what's on that makeshift table, there's that flower hoser, which is from a descendant of the North, which is one of the people that I talked to, and she told me stories of her ancestors. The railroad spike was found up north when I was being shown around by Steve, who takes care of the cemetery. He's one of the cemetery directors. And we were just wandering around up north, and my partner picked it up right on the railroad. And then I was like, wow, how amazing to have this object that connects to my great-great-grandfather since he worked on the railroad. And I have no images of him. I don't know what he looks like. And I'm like, this is the closest thing I have to touching him in a way. The dough bowl was a gift from my bubby to my mom. I don't really know the provenance of that dough bowl, but when I was a little kid, it was like a crib for my dolls and also a thing of make-believe. And for me, that connects to how for so long the North was just a place of my imagination. My dad would tell me some things, but I'd always be like, let's go. And he's like, about it. He had really fond memories of it, but he left when he was 10. And I guess the journey just felt very, very far afterwards, right? So all of it is really about these connections to the real place, to the imagination of it, and to other people.
Well, we're going to take a quick break from Meichan and Evelyn, which has been so cool to hear them talk about this. Like, it's such a neat thing that you can just walk by and you can see literally a window into these different cultures and different storylines. So neat. So the next time I'm in Toronto, I'm going to stop by, and you, the listener, could also stop by in your brand spanking new Toyota from our sponsor today, North Bay Toyota. So let's be honest. You obviously you're going to drive down there. However, you want to do it in comfort. Like, you don't want to be in a car for 3 hours, 3.5 hours, however long it takes you to get to Toronto in just any old car. You want to do it in style and comfort. And right now, you can take advantage of some of the great offers that they have, some amazing lease deals, including the 2025 Tundra Double Cab SR four-wheel drive and a limited number of 2025 RAV4s. So again, you're driving to Toronto, it takes you 3.5 hours. If you're driving with Bill, it takes like 2 hours. However long it takes you to get down there, you want to do it in comfort. So the next time you go on a Backroads adventure, wherever that does take you, do it in style and do it in a Toyota. It's time to Toyota at North Bay Toyota down at 640 McEwen or online at NorthBayEcho.ca for details. And thank you to North Bay Toyota for being a sponsor on the Backroads Bill podcast.
North Bay Echo is proud to partner with Twigs Coffee Roasters, a part of the community since 1995. Twigs offers a wide selection of quality beans, fresh roasted in-house every day. Find your favorite specialty drinks at our espresso bar, rejuvenate with freshly squeezed juice, or treat yourself to mouth-watering selections from our gourmet deli. And don't forget our irresistible fresh baked goods, including uncompromising gluten-free options. Twigs has 5 locations to serve you, from North Bay to Sturgeon Falls to Sudbury. Order online for pickup at twigs.ca. And coming soon, you'll be able to order fresh roasted coffee beans direct to your doorstep from our distribution center in North Bay.
It's interesting how some of the artifacts are personal. And of course, I think when we keep these things, we have to remember there's stories behind them, and the stories should be passed on. Now, some of the artifacts or some of the display items, like the skis, at the beginning, I had no idea what those skis meant, but they were explained, and you might as well explain it while we're on that topic.
So one of the people that I connected with, Stephen Edelbaum, who, as I said, is the director of Northern Chevre Kadisha Cemetery, his dad, Abe, was responsible for helping to lay some of the ski trails. And Abe, before Steve, took care of the cemetery. And I really wanted to honor Abe and Steve in this story. Steve has been so generous with just telling me so much about the North, hosting me up, showing me around Kirkland Lake, animating the space for me, because it's really hard to get to know the space when so much is not obvious anymore. Like, I can Google map things, but to walk down the streets with somebody and for them to tell me the stories, because he grew up there, it's just a whole other experience. So it was really important that I tie that into the display. Also, in Abe's store, he sold suits and ski wear because he thought just selling suits was a little depressing, as told to me. So he wanted to connect it to a passion. And that just also speaks to the diversity of the Jewish life in the North. You know, yes, there was hardship. Yes, it was like a big journey to get from, in my family's instance, from Romania to Northern Ontario. This was before we have the highways to get up there. But there was also a lot of good times, you know, there was a lot of leisure that also existed. So I wanted to include that in the narrative.
Now, Evelyn, it's this exhibit, this installation is not about immigration per se, but there is that background story, even to me in my brain, and the story I'm just completing for digital purposes, talks a little bit about that. We go from the past to the contemporary to the future because we are a land of immigrants. And so maybe a couple comments on that again, but that was not the intent of I will relate to you, that's for sure.
Well, it's definitely part of the backdrop of the story for sure. There was a spike in violence, anti-Jewish violence, in pockets across Eastern Europe, particularly in the 1880s, but it didn't stop. So Jews were trying to find a way to get out. And Meichan's great-great-grandfather came around 1905, and she could speak more to this particular history, but Jews would come to the urban centers, but there was opportunity to move to the north if you had, I guess, that enterprising spirit. Um, so, yeah, it is a story of immigration and how to build a new life, and that part of that was still maintaining something essential of community, of keeping Jewish traditions, which largely happen communally. There are some of our traditions are in the home, but a lot can only really be animated and activated in community. And it was a challenge for the communities to have kosher meat, for example, or maintain a rabbi, or teachers. Meichan's grandmother writes about tutors coming, and the kids put like breadcrumbs in his bed because they didn't want to study Hebrew, and he didn't last. But yeah, you had to bring a tutor all the way up north if you wanted your kids to have an education. But the determination is really inspiring, and the infrastructure they built. That's not just about synagogue life, but social services and recreation. There's all these photos in the archives of basketball teams and baseball teams, and
And the swimming bus.
yeah, this community-sponsored bus taking kids to go swimming to the lake, and it's really moving. And I guess maybe predictably didn't last for more than a couple generations. Folks, I guess, of Meichan's father's generation started going to university in the big cities, and it was actually the parents would follow them to the city for a family reunification. But in some cases, and I think this was your family's case, Meichan, your grandparents kind of went back, came to the city, went back. So there was like a push-pull because that was the life they knew.
Yeah, it was also opportunities, right? Like in my family's instance, my bubby came to Toronto as a young preteen, because one of her sisters was ill and they needed a doctor, and the specialist happened to be in Toronto. And after a period, they went back up north because the opportunities were still there, the family stores were still there. And my Zadie's family, who, my Zadie was born in Toronto in Kensington Market, was a Kensington Market Jew, that's the story that really Toronto is good at telling because it's so present, right? We have so much history and archives here, which is great. But yeah, his family also went up north for a while because there was opportunity there. So there's that connection too, and I loved this with Fentster being located just on the outskirts of Kensington Market to connect these sides of my family history together also.
As we're kind of like talking about this being like this is a lot about Northern Ontario. What was the biggest difference between living in Northern Ontario versus living in Toronto? Like, is there anything that's ever happened where maybe people who've never been up north were like, wow, I didn't know that maybe there's a change in a bit of the culture, or anything that was kind of surprising, I think, for a lot of people who were just in Toronto versus the people who did move up north?
The way I'll approach this is, so most of what was told to me was just like through first or second hand accounts, right? So the way that I was able to learn about Northern Jewish life was through storytelling, right? Since I never lived up in Kirkland Lake, And really, I was like being told, like, I'd connect with one person, they'd be like, oh, you got to talk to this person. That's actually how I met a distant cousin who lives in North Bay, Belle.
Oh.
Shout out to Belle Kizzle and
Oh, there
her
you go.
partner, Howard. Wonderful humans. And, and they were like, you have to speak to this person. And then that person would tell me, you have to speak to this person. And the whole web of interconnected families is how I learned about really dynamic parts of Jewish life in the North. Like, as Evelyn mentioned, it was hard to have a sochlet, like a kosher butcher. And it was hard to have a steady rabbi in the synagogue after a certain point. So things became reform before there was reform, is what it was told to me. Things just became a little bit more loosened from some of the rigid traditions, or could seen as being rigid traditions, or strict. I don't know how to quite phrase that properly, but
Like out of necessity.
exactly. Out of necessity, things just became more flexible in order to keep, I think, what was the heart of the tradition, right? And the heart of coming together and being in community and having your history and your culture preserved.
There's
So
another
yes.
thing that jumps out at me, if it's okay to jump in,
Yeah, please.
is my impression from both what I've learned from Miechan and from what we have in the Ontario Jewish Archives is, if there was a special occasion, if there was a wedding, or we have this photo in the exhibition of an engagement party, the whole community was invited. Because it's small enough. I mean, I also think about the dynamics. You're not going to invite that one family.
Yeah, it's fair to say that it's a more tight-knit community up there, right?
So I think that feels different than city life, that there's a wedding and everyone's part of it. But also what Meichan's Bubby writes about is like that scene where she uses the metaphor of the butterflies, is that the women also prepared the food for the wedding, right? It's not like there's this city caterer. Like, all the families are preparing the food and laying it out on the table, and there's this kind of pulling together and supporting each other that maybe we're not as familiar with.
Yeah, she literally wrote, weddings were a community affair.
These are, when you're in small numbers, you create and preserve your own community, and you may not have again, as it grows, perhaps like a lot of cultural groups, they have the Davidi Club, or they develop this and that. But with small numbers, you basically go back to that familiar, that family, and multiple families, and get together depending on the event, the occasion. Could be a wedding, could be anything for that matter. As we're transitioning, I really don't want to miss the next phase of this, and the going back to the cemetery. I've been to the cemetery many times, and I leave rocks, but I didn't realize there's I think at the last count in the email, 155 people to recognize, to identify there, and what you're going to do next. Because I might think that in your mind, in your brain, this next part maybe only evolved after the installation was put together, and visiting over time.
Yeah, so the next project that I'm working on, as I mentioned, there's about 155 headstones. Some are unmarked. And so my great-great-grandfather, he drowned before my bubby arrived. My great-great-grandmother arrived. And this is something that I learned through my bubby's journals, and also like archivally have verified that this did indeed happen. And his headstone was one of the first three, which was also his son and cousin, in the cemetery in northern Chevra Kadisha. And so that really connects me in a special way to that cemetery, that this cemetery came together because before their deaths, there wasn't a Jewish cemetery in the north. And he drowned in the Blanche River, which is proximal to the cemetery as well. And when I was up last summer, I collected stones by the river. There was a newly built bridge, so there was a lot of a lot of stones there. And so I've cast them in bronze. Bronze itself is mostly copper. Copper was one of the materials that's mined in the north, so I like to also connect it to the physicality of the land. Bronze is also a material of memorial, and really is used a lot to recognize things as like eternal. And yeah, so I'm just going to be reaching out to the folks that I have connected with through this project, and offer them the cast and the stone if they want to go and place it and have that connection. Or if they're not able to make that journey, I will make it for them and send them the cast. Now I know I won't be able to have that connection to every stone or every headstone because I haven't been able to connect with every family. Some family lines don't exist anymore. So that is still evolving as to what I will do with the stones that can't be placed, but the ones that I can be placed, it will really be a private ceremony of exchange and an offering. And in many ways, it's a gift of thank you to all of the people that I've connected with through this project. So although I know I wanted to do something around the cemetery and with casting of stones, I really realized the importance of it through the many, many conversations that built up to my exhibition at Fentster.
Yeah, I really like the setting of that cemetery. I write about cemeteries all the time. Cemeteries are not, I often use this phrase, the cemeteries are not for the dead, they're for the living. And I think this is a continuation of that theme. But I didn't want to forget about that strength. This is going to sound terrible, but the strength of that woman being your great-great-grandmother who came here widowed, so to speak, with 2 children and had to start a store. That's a story in itself. We talk about the suffragette movement and all kinds of things, but for that person, Betty was, I think, her name, and that's an incredible thing to just say, oh, I've got to survive. That's another story in itself. And I think that's in the back, not in the back of your mind, but I think that was some of the impetus or motivation to do the installation as well.
Yeah, it was actually 3 children. So she lost 1 son, and then had a surviving son and 2 surviving daughters, and she came over with them. But yeah, no, her spirit and her love inspired my bubby, and my bubby inspired me, and does to this day. And the title of the exhibition actually comes from the journals because there's a line where my bubby dedicates it to myself and my siblings and cousins and says, like, I will relate to you as was told to me. And also in her writing says that she wants her grandchildren to know that they came from love.
That love and that chi just continues to move on. And I think that's one of the things I came away from looking at it, although it's on a screen, and I did not get the chance to go down there and be in front of that storefront. That's what I came with, that whole kind of hierarchy of familiar love and affection that gets passed along the way. And of course, through the components, the artifacts, some of them are contemporary, but some of them relate to the past. So Ben, other thoughts from you before we start to wind down here?
Yeah, I was going to say as we start to wind down, first of all, if you want to check out some of the photos, go to the Fentster website, so FENTSTER.org, and you can see not just what Meichan's doing, but also all the other stuff that Evelyn and her team has been doing, which is fantastic. But so here on the Backroads Bill podcast, this time of year is obviously the holiday season, and we've been doing a lot of holiday-themed / winter-themed stuff. And Bill, when you brought this to me a couple weeks ago, I was super excited to be able to talk because mostly in our environment, or in our community, again, it's very heavily Catholic and Protestant. But we've seen a huge influx of many different cultures have started to come in, which has been fantastic in the North Bay area. And one of the things that I wanted to ask both of you, because obviously, Christmas isn't just a it's not just a religious thing. It's kind of transcended that to be more of just an overall holiday. But this time of year, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a platform to be, what does this time of year mean for you in the Jewish community? And what are some of the things that you celebrate just to educate some of the people who are not Jewish?
It's probably not a coincidence that our holiday, Hanukkah, happens this time of year, because it is also a festival about bringing light. Ultimately, it commemorates an ancient story that is about resistance to assimilation, which is kind of ironic how it has evolved, kind of being paired with Christmas, because it's a fun holiday. It's one of the home-based holidays, so it's very accessible, and it's one of the more celebrated even for very secular Jews. But it's actually not the most important Jewish holiday, so there's not particularly a feeling of like the holiday season in the Jewish world. And it's gotten elevated to a more significant status than it holds in Jewish life because of this proximity to Christmas. And I think also, like, not to be too cynical about it, but because now there's an effort to be inclusive, so people want to kind of balance out the dominance of Christmas by shining light on Hanukkah. But our more significant holidays are the Jewish New Year that happen in the fall, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Passover, Pesach, that is a spring holiday, are more core to our tradition. I don't know. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah. Well,
No,
I'll
that's
just say-
great too, because like it's good to know, because we think that like Hanukkah is a big thing, right? We assume, and so saying that it's kind of shed some light on on that for again people who are not Jewish. So yeah.
Well, I grew up in a multi-faith household, and Hanukkah for me as a little kid was always, because I always had both. Like, so I always, like in the very OC, if you know the OC, classic Christmaka, like that was my experience as a kid, was that everything was always very much both. And like Christmas wasn't religious either in my house at all. It was really like present time. And so, yeah, so for me, I think it's neither have this like sanctified space, and more so it's about being with family, being with community, and eating until you have to unbutton your pants.
There's always food. Food is a big part of all the holidays. And it is interesting to note that we have special food traditions with each holiday. It's like the rabbis knew that was a hook. So because the story of Hanukkah relates to a miracle of this oil lasting longer than it should have to light the special lamp in the temple, so there's a tradition of eating fried foods, which is not so bad. In Eastern European Jewish families, it's these potato pancakes and donuts, but in Jewish families from other parts of the world, like Morocco or Iraq or Yemen, they'll have other food traditions. But they're all you can't go wrong with fried something.
I always find it fascinating talking to people about whether it's their culture, religion, or whatever, because there's so many different things in this world that are it's fascinating how just everything is different for everybody, and I think that's an important thing to understand. So thank you for that, Bill. I don't know if you have anything you want to wrap up with, or.
Well, I'm just we're just fortunate today to be, this. I will relate to you that we linked Northern Ontario, which is kind of the background theme of the Backroads Bill podcast, but and it ends up, oh wow, there's something about this in downtown Toronto. Who knew about this? And again, I'm glad that it didn't go by my radar and was picked up, and so we're glad to kind of have Evelyn Miechan on the show, and we'll look forward to maybe coming back again when you have the casting, or pick one of those out. That would be an interesting thing to talk about, because that's so many sidebar stories to all these stories, and we don't have enough time, Ben.
No, we don't. Anything that we didn't cover that you both wanted to talk about or cover?
There's a few things that came to mind. One is, I guess I just want to say, as a kind of city person, I hope it's obvious by now the way we all became enchanted with this story, and that the story of Meichan's family is an entry point into something much bigger. And her bubby left this resource for the family, but actually it's very compelling and very moving. All of us who worked on the project, and I should say I had worked with Donna Bernardo-Cerise from the Ontario Jewish Archives, and we had another curator, Nama Freeman. We were all completely enchanted by the beautiful way that her bubby writes, but also just imagining what this community was like from the early days of 1905, 1907, when her great-great-grandparents came, and when things were really scrappy, to the time of when her dad was born, and things were a little more established by those standards. And another connection I'll make back to the exhibition is that when you look closely at the images, or if you have a chance to visit, in the layer beneath the floorboards, we also have these beautiful sheer black and white family photos of Meichan's family either swimming or playing nearby the water, as a way to also pay tribute to the fun times and the beauty of the area, and contrast it to this very sad beginning where the water was a place of death for the family.
It also gave life.
Yeah, they're really touching and beautiful images that show the actual life, and that also that not everything was about not to distill the story just about commerce or ritual or Jewish communal events, but also that they played in the water, And we have photos in the archives of people doing other nature activities.
Yeah, from adversity comes positivity, and there's a transition. And the notion for me, though, let's anticipate that people will not stop writing or not stop recording in whatever way in this digital age. So we have those journals that are indeed priceless in this particular case, and this particular installation. You can edit that one out, Ben.
I'll see.
Yeah, you'll see it.
I just wanted to mention it because I think we maybe kind of brushed by it, that there is a Jewish tradition when you visit a grave to place a stone on the grave. I think we kind of jumped into the narrative without mentioning that. So I don't know if there's a way to stick that in.
Well, there is, and it's in my story because I stop there and I leave stones, because that's people need to be remembered, and that's one way of, when you visit, you leave that because you return to the earth, and that whole organic kind of transition of one's mind, body, and spirit. Ben, over to you.
Well, I was just going to ask quickly, what is the, outside of what you said, Bill, what is the significance of the stone on the grave?
There's many writings of what it could mean. Some writings say that it's to help with adding to the grave itself. So you're doing a mitzvah in that way, a good deed. Some writings say that since the stone is eternal, it points to that eternal bond you have to the person that has passed. That's the meaning that I really resonate with. And some writings I've read say that it's to let the priests know that there's a grave there, so they don't come in contact with it. So take what meaning you connect with. If there's one thing in Judaism, it's that there's many, many meanings for the same thing, and that it's in the conversation where I feel like the truths lie. And I did just want to add one thing unconnected to the stones, but about water, that on one of my trips up north, I did actually paddle down the Blanche River to take that journey metaphorically that my ancestors took on that river. And I didn't know how that experience would go. I was really apprehensive. I went up with a friend. We spent 3 days scouting the river, building up to me entering into the river, having a lot of conversations about what it could feel like. And I was washed with gratitude when I got in the boat. The area I was down, the Blanche River, probably looks the same as it always has, like there was no development in it, so to speak, so it was just the nature. And yes, my ancestors perished in that river, but also that river is what brought the community up north. That was the way they came. It was the river that brought life. So having the images of my family in the water, including lots of my dad, who tragically passed this summer, I was able to connect both to yes, the water took life, but it also really gives life. The water gives nourishment and sustenance and passage between states and memory.
As always, our conversations are enriching, and we walk away with that, and I'll show you a lot of gratitude. Namaste.
Yes, thank you both so much for joining us today. This has been a fantastic conversation, and good luck with your future endeavors.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
So as I was scripting out this outro, the first thing I wrote was, what a neat window. And then I realized it was a terrible pun, so then I kind of scrapped that. But it is a really cool window into the lifestyle and some of the unique things that different cultures, and in this case the Jewish community, has gone through in their life. And again, the general stores and community that Meichan and Evelyn talked about, and really understanding their really tight-knit community and getting to see that, for whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, to be able to see that in this style, I think is so neat, and it's what makes art so interesting. So again, super interesting to listen to both of them. We thank both of them for taking their time to come on and share their story and their experience with us. And it's going to be fun to see what's on the horizon for both of them, actually. And again, this time of year, to get a perspective from people who, again, they don't celebrate Christmas. They have their own traditions. They do things a little bit differently than maybe what you're used to celebrating. I find it always interesting and fascinating to listen to that stuff and understand how other people experience, the same life that we're going through. So if you enjoyed today's episode, you can find more episodes of the Backroads Build podcast every Wednesday morning, including our special Christmas Day episode next week. We have a really cool one lined up, so make sure you follow and, of course, subscribe to the show to not miss it. We have some really amazing guests lined up for the new year, including a couple of really big deal people. Like, it's actually really exciting. We're just about to talk to someone all the way from San Francisco who has ties to Northern Ontario. It is so neat. So make sure you subscribe so you can stick around with all of the super cool stuff we have in store in 2025 for this podcast. And also check out our website, NorthBayEcho.ca, where you can find not just this podcast, but all of the other great local North Bay content that's on there. To North Bay with Love, Echo Essentials, Echo Sportscast, some other shows that some very talented local people do as well. And of course, subscribe to our newsletter, Echo Essentials. It puts everything from podcasts to news and events in one neat package. And it comes out every Wednesday alongside this podcast and is delivered right into your inbox. What more can you ask for this Christmas season? So that wraps things up. We will see you on Christmas Day for another Backroads adventure.